Hi, I'm David Ard, OEM Sales for QLogic, focused on Dell. Here today with Trent Bates from the Enterprise Server Group at Dell. I'll let you do a quick introduction there, Trent.
My name's Trent Bates. I work on the product management team, and I'm responsible for choosing our roadmap for adapters.
Great. So we're here at the 1025 100 SolutionFest here, hosted first annual hosted here in QLogic. And listen, Trent, there's been a lot of excitement lately about the latest launch of Dell's server I/O team with the 25 gig launch. And I'll tell you, if I remember back about 24 months ago when we first started having conversations about 25 gigabit Ethernet, I got to tell you, then you weren't too interested in that. You didn't see a lot of market demand. You didn't see a lot of customers asking for that. But here we are now. You're the first Tier 1 vendor to launch this, and there's a lot of excitement, a lot of demand. Just curious what you saw changing and what you saw driving this change in the overall direction with Dell.
So initially, I don't know how interesting this is for people, but initially 25 gig was really a hyperscale kind of move. And the advantage that hyperscale has is that deployments are all uniform. It's the same thing. You basically cable up to the top of rack, and you have uniform deployments. Now, for an enterprise customer, so I don't deal with hyperscale customers. That's a different group. What I care about is an enterprise customer buying PowerEdge servers. What do those customers want? And so you looked at 25 gig initially, and it wasn't that interesting. But 25 gig evolved, so they added 5-meter cables, which was important. It may seem kind of strange, but a good optics ecosystem, a good optic and cable ecosystem is really important. And we made it very clear that 3 meters just isn't good enough. You have to be able to go between racks. That requires 5-meter cables. And also, initially, 25 gig was only going to be cables. There was not going to be any optics. And so through the consortium, there's a lot of people that put their input into that, and optics became available. And then last of all, which is important for our enterprise customers, is that the 25 gig, there will be an IEEE certification on that, and so it's not just consortium based, and that's really important for to get traction in the enterprise, to have that capability. And last of all, to have an SFP28 connector that's compliant with SFP Plus is a really big deal, because that allows a customer to start adopting 25 gig without having to worry about getting into, plugging into their old network. So they can kind of, instead of ripping everything up, they can kind of grow into 25 gig where they need it or where they want it. And so having an SFP28 connector reduces friction, makes it easier for customers to adopt. So I will say also, part of the value of 25 gig, people say it all the time, is 4 lanes versus 1. So if you compare 25 gig versus 40 gig uses 4 lanes of 10, and 25 gig uses a single lane of 25. Now that value translates into silicon on the switch side and on the adapter side, so it's more efficient there. Your cables are more efficient, or I'll say cost effective, and your optics are also more cost effective because you have a single lane. So overall, that's the message that permeated the market, where for 2.5 times the bandwidth, it's not going to be 2.5 times the price. It's going to be some incremental cost to our customers, but not 2.5 times. But what's interesting, so that message is out there. I agree with it. But on the adapter side, what's interesting is for a piece, again, this is going to get a little bit numbery, but if you look at a PCIe Gen 3 connection, which is what we have right now, for a by-8 connection, the maximum bandwidth you're going to get is 50 gigabits, approximately. There's overhead with Ethernet. I don't want to get too detailed, but approximately 50 gig. And that's what 2 ports of 25 can do. And so, for me, I believe there's some efficiency there. And if you look at 100 gig, you have to go to a by 16 for a single port of 100 gig. And if you look at 40 gig, for 40 gig, if you're doing a by 8 40 gig, well then you can only really do 50 gig of bandwidth through it. So you're not fully utilizing the bandwidth that you have with that card. And if you do a by 16 version of that card, well then you're getting throughput of 80 gig, and you're wasting kind of some of the bandwidth that's available in by 16. So I feel like some of the efficiencies that will be attributed to 25 gig will not be just because of the 4 lanes versus 1, but also because it just matches up really well with the PCIe Gen 3 by 8 card. And so if you think about that, and so 40 gig, I mean, we have a lot of good 40 gig products, and we have customers. I mean, we have a broad set of networking products and switches. We have 40 gig adapters. So I would say that in the networking space, there is 40 gig adoption. When we talk to customers that have adopted 40 gig down to the server, they do it because they need to. And so they have a portion of their data center is 40 gig. And they only really deploy where they need to. The biggest difference between 25 gig and 40 gig is that 25 gig has the opportunity, in my mind, to become the default. So we've already talked to customers, and there's all. I mean, we said again, it's exciting. I mean, there's a lot of interest in 25 gig. It's actually really, I knew there would be interest. I did not know there would be this much interest. And it's great working on products that people are interested in. I mean, it's great. So the biggest difference, I think, between 25 gig and 40 gig is that people will choose 25 gig as a default. Well, they'll just say, look, I don't want to manage two different speeds. 25 gig is only incremental cost. We need it here in this area. Let's just make everything 25 gig. So people say, oh, 25 gig versus 40. I mean, that's not as interesting for us. And again, this is down to the server. I think what becomes interesting for 25 gig is where people say, is it 10 versus 25 gig? And they'll just say, hey, look, I don't want to have a mixed environment. Let's just go 25 gig. And so I think that's why the 25 gig adoption will be much higher than, say, 40 eventually, because of that. And we have customers that use the S6000, the Dell S6000 networking switch, and they do the what's called the octopus cables, and they break out down to the servers. That makes sense. But that's still 10 gig. It's still not 40 gig. And I just want to point out that technically they're not octopus cables. They're actually quadrupus cables. You know, there's only 4 connections there. You know, it's better in an environment where you can, on a sales call, when you make that joke, you can hear the groans of the sales team, and that's what I'm really going for. So sadly, we don't get that in this environment. But so 40 gig in the network, I think, is out there. It's popular. 40 gig uplinks off a 10 gig switch is great, and soon those will be switching to 100 gig, and I just think all of that helps make sense for 25 gig down to the server.
So you said you've got a pretty significant amount of interest from Dell Enterprise customers. From your perspective and the conversations that you're having with the customers in the Dell Enterprise space, what types of environments do you see 25 gig going into initially, and where do you see the adoption really starting to take off over time?
So we at Dell we use a term called web tech, where it's an amalgam of customers that have products on the web, are whether it's video, a lot of different things associated with the web, cloud as well, and so that area of web tech, it's going to be very popular, and we do quite well there, especially with our Dell networking switches. We have the Z9100 switch. When we pair that with the value that we bring of bringing 25 gig down to the server, we've seen a lot of interest from customers in that area. Now, those customers are very technical customers. They're very savvy. A lot of them see 25 gig down to the server as either a competitive edge that gives them an edge over the market that they're in, but also we think that a lot of these customers will feel like they'll need to go to 25 gig. I mean, hyperscale, so the very large deployments, 25 gig is going to be there. So some of our PowerEdge customers are going to need to go to 25 gig to get the efficiencies to compete in their niche against those larger customers. So in that web tech space, there is definitely going to be strong adoption. Now, and those customers are really pushing it. So if you talk about like filling a pipe, a 25 gig pipe, you can fill a single port of 25 gig, no problem. You can fill 2 ports of 25 gig, no problem. But when you're talking about pushing out 25, or essentially pushing out 50 gig of bandwidth and receiving pushing out 50 gig of bandwidth and receiving 50 gig of bandwidth at the same time, that's where there's some different technologies that you'll have to use. There's kernel bypass technologies. There's Ethernet RDMA technologies that they either allow you to reduce the load on the CPU or spread the load across multiple cores on the CPU. So when you're really filling the pipe both ways, those kind of sophisticated customers know how to do that. Now, for a standard enterprise customer, I mean, anytime you're moving a file, I mean, it's pretty simple. Anytime you're moving a file, it's interesting, right? So if you look at virtual machine migration, it's interesting there. You know, it's virtual machine migration, the speed at which that happens, the speed at which you want to evacuate a server, it's proportional with how much bandwidth you have. So it's 2.5 times faster. If you look at backing up, 2.5 times faster. It also becomes very interesting around software-defined storage. Again, that's where the CPU offloading capabilities come into play, where with software-defined storage, you're actively using the CPU for other things, so you don't want to consume that CPU with your Ethernet traffic. And if you combine Ethernet RDMA with 25 gig, you can still move around a lot of data between servers, but still get performance out of your CPU. And still not slow down the workloads that you're running.
So that all very interesting, and these are things that I think will really start to play out in the industry as these ecosystems start to build out, and more of the features and capabilities are brought into not only the server adapters but into the overall ecosystem environment. What do you see the impact of some of the flash storage and some of the tremendous growth we've seen on the storage side from a flash perspective? Do you see that really playing into some of the reliance and need for more 25 gig and up capabilities in the server side?
I mean, we've mentioned the excitement, but I'm going to have to mention it again. Flash, I mean, in reality, Flash has been really good for storage. And again, it's exciting times in storage land. And we have, Dell has a lot of great flash storage offerings. So Flash has really removed hard drives as being a bottleneck in the system. So if you're looking at so then what becomes the next bottleneck? Is it the network? Is it the CPU? Or what is it? So 25 gig definitely helps the bottleneck to no longer be, or to, I wouldn't say no longer, because it really depends on how you're deploying it and what you're doing, but having a 25 gig network makes it so that the I/O is definitely not the bottleneck. And again, the technologies I mentioned before help the CPU offload some of that capability, even storage offloads in this case, which QLogic is strong in. Those help really balance it and make so that the next bottleneck isn't the bottleneck anymore. So yeah, Flash has really vitalized the storage industry. It's also helped the I/O industry. It's going to help 25 gig. And these new technologies coming out to make sure that the CPU can be utilized. I mean, basically, so you can still run workloads on the CPU and the transfer of data doesn't consume that CPU. I think those technologies are available.
All right. Anything else you want to leave for the folks that are looking at the solutions here?
I don't think I have any other parting messages.
All right. Great. Thanks, Trent. We appreciate your time today.
Thanks. That was awesome.